What does it all mean?
This is where the archaeology has been found.
Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, look at that.
I need a planter.
A shrine to a belly button.
This is a rock salt? Look at that.
No one gets into this place.
No one.
Whoa, don't take me too far.
Now that's naked archaeology.
He's considered by some to be the most important figure in the Gospels after Jesus. The Gospels themselves say that he was Jesus' favorite. It was said that he would not die until the advent of the kingdom of God. And the secret of his identity is the central mystery of the novel, the Da Vinci Code. And yet, no one knows his identity. He's known only as the beloved disciple. People may be surprised to find out that this beloved disciple appears only in the Gospel of John and only some 3 or 4 times. So maybe by trying to unravel a 2,000-year-old mystery and looking at each instance where the beloved disciple appears, we could try to figure out who is the beloved disciple. So who are the suspects? He should be one of Jesus' 12 disciples. The most obvious is John. For almost 2,000 years, scholars and theologians assumed that John was the beloved because he was the author of the gospel. And he was simply too modest to identify himself as Jesus' favorite. Recently, however, scholars have concluded that the title of the gospel was probably added later, so it's unlikely that John was the author. This has thrown a shroud back over the identity of the beloved disciple. I asked Professor James Charlesworth what the gospel does tell us about the mysterious unnamed disciple.
Where does in the text, where do we know the beloved disciple from? How many times does he appear? What does he do at each scene? What is he doing?
Okay. He appears for the first time as the disciple whom Jesus loved. That is the beloved disciple in chapter 13 at the Last Supper. And he is just to the right of Jesus. The next time he appears, he's at the foot of the cross, and Jesus commissions him, "Son, behold your mother." And then the next scene, he races with Peter to the tomb, and he gets there first.
The beloved disciple appears then only 3 times?
That's right.
At the Last Supper?
At the cross and at the open grave.
So who could the beloved disciple be? Some have suggested Judas Iscariot, the man who betrayed Jesus. But the novel, The Da Vinci Code, proposes the most controversial candidate for the disciple whom Jesus loved, Mary Magdalene. Although she wasn't a disciple, some older traditions do suggest that she married Jesus and had a child with him.
Well, what's wrong with that? There are 3 passages in John where the beloved disciple appears, and the second one, he's at the cross, and Jesus says to the beloved disciple, "Son, behold your mother." Well, now we have a problem. Is Mary Magdalene really a male? And so
you mean when he says son,
yes,
he's addressing the beloved disciple?
So Mary Magdalene disappears, and then people say, how about Judas? Why not Judas? At the Last Supper, he's to the left of Jesus, and according to the Gospel of John, he's a powerful man, but he cannot be the beloved disciple because Judas is on the left, the beloved disciple is on the right, so Judas can't be in both places. So now we're left with the question, who could it be?
If I'm going to answer that question, I need to see the places where the events took place. The Gospel of John is clear that the beloved disciple makes his dramatic first appearance at the Last Supper, where he's described resting his head on Jesus' chest. And the 1600-year-old tradition points to this as the place where the Last Supper occurred.
This isn't the building. It's this building. It's not this.
Although most of the building was destroyed when the Romans flattened Jerusalem in 70, the lower walls are still made up of stones from the time of Jesus. The second floor was rebuilt and dates to almost 1,000 years ago. Still, some scholars believe it was the headquarters for the early followers of Jesus, including the beloved disciple. Professor James Tabor showed me the building.
This is where the beloved disciple puts the head on.
That's right.
On the
right
shoulder.
here.
This is where Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
Leonardo's famous painting depicts all 12 disciples at the Last Supper. Taken together, the four Gospels identify all of them, but only some of them are named in the Gospel of John. And Professor Tabor thinks that's a clue.
My theory is we've got to start with the idea that he's not named. So I'm going to eliminate any of the 12 disciples that are named. Like it's not Peter, it's not Andrew, it's not James, it's not John. But if you take of the 12, the ones that aren't named anywhere in the gospel, you come up with Simon and James and Jude. I'm not talking about the well-known James and Simon and Judas Iscariot, but the ones mentioned at the tail end of all the lists, possibly, I think, Jesus' brothers. And so that's a clue. It's one of those three.
The Gospel of Matthew identifies James, Judah, and Simon as Jesus' brothers. But which one is called the beloved in John?
I know whom I have chosen.
There must be more evidence. So I decided to look at the most famous scene in the Gospels, the crucifixion. And I discovered that not only is the beloved disciple there, the text seems to identify him.
He's a total man. He's a total man.
I'm searching for the identity of the mysterious beloved disciple whom the Gospel says would not die until the advent of the kingdom of God. So far, I've definitely eliminated the disciples John and Judas, as well as Mary Magdalene. James Tabor has led me to the most likely suspects, James, Judah, and Simon, whom the Gospel of Matthew say are Jesus' brothers. But which one is it? The beloved is the only disciple to witness the crucifixion. And there Jesus speaks directly to him. I asked Professor James Charlesworth whether the text can help us narrow down the suspects.
Let's look at the Gospel of John. In chapter 19, Jesus is on the cross. He looks down and the beloved disciple is there. Jesus calls the beloved disciple son.
And he says, behold your mother. Mm-hmm. And does he say anything else?
Oh, yes. Yes. Mother, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. The implication is from that moment, he's asking the beloved disciple to be a son to his mother.
If the beloved is one of Jesus' brothers, in whose hands would Jesus commission Mary, his mother? The Gospels don't say, but James Tabor thinks that what Jesus said from the cross is the key to the identity of the beloved disciple.
Who would Jesus give the care of his own mother to? I think it has to be James, the brother of Jesus. Who do you give your mother to in Judaism? If the elder brother dies, the next son has to take over the custody of the mother. So it makes perfect sense. He says to him in a kind of formal ceremony, mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother. And it says that disciple took her into his house. So where's his house? James, probably right here.
If James was so important, why does the Gospel edit out his name? What many people forget is that Jesus and James were Orthodox Jews, as were the disciples. Some scholars believe that by the time John was set to paper, a new version of Jesus had begun to emerge. Jesus, the man, whose Jewish followers called the Messiah, was being replaced by Christ, the right hand of God. The Gospel of John needed to reflect this new reality.
Thy sins are forgiven thee.
James Tabor thinks that this explains why Jesus' brother was turned into the anonymous, beloved disciple.
Why would you knock him out? Because he's the flesh and blood brother of Jesus. He takes over the movement. and he's essentially representing Jewish Christianity. By the time John is finally redacted and edited, we've got a Christ who's a God, who's pre-existent, who comes from heaven. He rules in the heavens at the right hand of God. This earthly brother stuff, and the idea that Mary had sex and had children, and a physical Jew as a brother is ruling the group. It's just too pedestrian, I think, for these people. These are mystics.
James Tabor's argument is compelling, but for a disciple who's so important, there's remarkably little sign of him in the rest of the New Testament. And yet, there is one more famous incident involving the beloved disciple. He races the disciple Peter to Jesus' empty tomb. Some say the race eliminates James, but points to another suspect for the beloved disciple.
He's a tall man. He's a tall man.
I'm trying to unravel the identity of the beloved disciple, who was the only one of Jesus' disciples to witness the crucifixion. There, he saw a curious detail. A Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side to make certain he was dead. According to the Gospels, 3 days later, Mary Magdalene found the tomb empty. Then, in what some argue is the beloved's most important appearance, he races another disciple, Simon Peter, to the empty tomb. To understand what happened when they got there and why it's important, I want to see the place where a 1600-year-old tradition tells us it happened. Iska Harani showed me what many Christians believe is the tomb of Jesus.
So right behind us is the tomb that used to be a cave, and then it was covered. But you can imagine that when Peter and the beloved disciple run to see the cave, and this is a barren land, they have to go up and down, they have to jump over rocks. They run in order to see a tomb which is carved in the rock.
And what they saw inside is the founding principle of Christianity.
What we hear is that when coming to the tomb, what they found was as it is you see now, right? It's a rock with nothing on it except 2 shrouds. And the shrouds were folded, the head shroud and the body shroud separately.
But the story of the foot race between the beloved disciple and Simon Peter contains an important detail.
It says that one of the disciples was running quicker, and he approached the tomb and he didn't step inside. Peter comes second, but first to enter the tomb, and he does not seem to understand what's going on. That's a very interesting, I would say bizarre narrative, because it insists on the running and the fact that the one runner was better than the other.
The gospel is clear that the beloved is the first to reach the tomb, and yet Simon Peter is the first to enter. Why does the beloved hesitate before going in? Professor James Charlesworth thinks that that moment may be the biggest clue to the code of the beloved disciple.
Now, why do you think that the beloved disciple doesn't go into the tomb? Pollution. He didn't want to pollute himself.
By coming into contact with a dead body.
Or going into a grave, yes. And then eventually he goes in. Okay, he goes in. Now you know the rules. For 6 days he must not appear to anybody.
Because he had entered a grave, Jewish law required the beloved to purify himself through prayer and sacrifice, ritual cleansing, and separation for 7 days. But according to the Gospels, that very night, Jesus appeared to the disciples. One of them wasn't there. The disciple Thomas, aka Doubting Thomas, whom the Gospels called Didymus. He was missing. Why?
Beginning of the 8th day. Now that's the first time that the beloved disciple can appear again, right? Guess who appears? Thomas. Now we have an explanation why Thomas wasn't there. He was purifying himself. And then he gives us a real insight. He says, I must see the wound in his side. Wait a minute. The wound in his side? When people are crucified, they don't have a wound in his side. How would he know that? The beloved disciple is the one that saw it. If the beloved disciple is the witness to the spear, then bingo, you begin to see the authors cleverly saying, perhaps the beloved disciple is Thomas.
But if the beloved is Thomas and not James, as Professor Tabor suggests, why would the Gospels hide him?
I thought I told you to kill that story.
Who was he? And why would Jesus have thought he was special?
Now that becomes abundantly clear when you study old Syriac traditions. He was considered the twin. In fact, in the Gospel of John, it refers to Thomas, Didymus Thomas. Now, Thomas in Aramaic means twin, and Didymus in Greek means twin, so we have a twin. The early tradition is that Thomas is Judas Thomas, the twin.
So we have a tradition that his name is Judas Thomas Didymus.
Right.
So we can surmise what? That his name was Yehuda, Judah, and that he was known as the twin. But whose twin is he?
Well, it has to be the twin of Jesus. But what does the twin of Jesus mean? Are we to take it literally that Jesus had a twin brother? Or are we to take it as a spiritual?
What if it is a literal twin? A recent archaeological discovery suggests Judah may have been related to Jesus, but that he wasn't his brother.
He's a total man. He's a total man.
I'm on the trail of the mysterious beloved disciple who was supposed to live until the advent of the kingdom of God. Following Professor James Charlesworth, I've discovered that the most likely candidate may be the disciple Thomas, who's also known as Judah, and was said by some to be Jesus' twin. But there's one more piece of the puzzle here, and it shows that the beloved disciple may not have been Jesus' brother after all.
We're just outside of Jerusalem. Traffic, not so much traffic now. We're in a parking lot. That in the middle of all this, there's a controversial tomb. Come on.
This could be where the famous foot race took place, because although most scholars dismiss it, some believe that this is the tomb of Jesus.
And there you have it, a sealed tomb.
When the tomb was reopened 2,000 years after the crucifixion, archaeologists found 10 bone boxes, or ossuaries. Most controversial was an ossuary with an inscription on it that said, Jesus, son of Joseph. Most dismissed the inscription as referring to another Jesus. But when I looked at the other ossuaries, there was one familiar name. And it may explain the mystery of the beloved disciple. Because the name on the ossuary is Judah, son of Jesus.
The son of Jesus? Can you point out the inscription actually?
It says here very clearly in very good script, Yehuda bar Yeshua, Judah, son of Jesus.
Of Nazareth?
No.
What?
This is Judah, the son of Jesus, one of the many Jesuses that lived in the first century in Jerusalem.
But if the ossuary did come from the tomb of Jesus of Nazareth, could it be that when Jesus said, "Woman, behold thy son," he was referring to his own son, and in effect telling Judah that he was now the head of the family? I asked James Charlesworth.
You've got him calling him son. Why does he call him son?
That's a good question. I think it's because I see Jesus trying to keep his movement continuing, not dying. But maybe there are some early Christian traditions that suggest that that could be a real son of Jesus. I don't know of any.
We have a piece of archaeology which says Judah, son of Jesus. If you take the archaeology, if you take the statements on the cross, son, if you take the tradition of the twin, I can tell you, my son, I can't tell you how many people have said, he's your twin, right? Because he looks like me. So the question is, couldn't twin really be junior?
I think we just have to be open and exploring and wondering, what are we learning and what are we capable of thinking? And I think it's a time to be bold and open and in dialogue with one another.
But if Jesus did have a son, why isn't he mentioned in any of the Gospels? Maybe he is, and we just haven't noticed.
I'm in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the traditional place where Jesus was arrested. He might have stood by this very olive tree. He was here with the disciples, and it's very interesting in terms of the mystery of the beloved disciple, because this is where the beloved disciple is conspicuous by his absence.
The beloved disciple was at the Last Supper. So why wouldn't he cross the Kidron Valley later that same night with the rest of the disciples? It turns out that he may have, but the scene didn't make it into the Gospel of John.
There's a clue in the Gospel of Mark. There's suddenly a little boy, a certain young man, in some kind of linen cloth that's following the arrested Jesus. Sounds like a kid. And suddenly what do you have? The soldiers turn around, grab him by the linen. He escapes. They're left with the linen in his hand, and he runs naked through the streets. Does that sound like a full-grown man? Or does that sound like a little kid following his father from a distance, trying to be with him as he's being led away to his death?
So is the beloved disciple Jesus' brother James, as Professor Tabor believes? Or is he Jesus' twin, Judas Thomas, as Professor Charlesworth maintains? Or could the beloved disciple have been Jesus' son, whose identity was at first hidden because Jesus' followers didn't want his enemies to know of an heir to the leadership? Later, he could have been written out of the Gospels because he didn't fit with the Church's evolving conception of Christ. If he was a son, this ossuary creates one last problem. The beloved disciple wasn't supposed to die before the advent of the kingdom of God. As it turns out, he makes one last appearance in the Gospel of John.
The beloved disciple is so important that he's mentioned in the very last lines of the Gospel of John. And that's where his death is mentioned. It seems that he was so central to their belief, and they were so sure that he would not die before Jesus came back, that the writer of the Gospel of John had to reassure them that even though he died before the second coming, it wasn't over. In a sense, the beloved disciple lives.
He's a total